All right, this part's going to feature the main subscription logic, I guess, that involves Stripe, as well as the views and handling errors and stuff that come bundled with Stripe elements, which we're going to use as an accompaniment to this. So before we begin, I need to make a few views to make this work. So in our subscriptions folder, I'm going to create a new .html.erb file, and that's going to be where a lot of things happen that we need to make this thing look good. So we'll get a section. All right, so here I'm outputting the chosen plan, which is going to stem from the pricing page we were just looking at in the last video. And as you redirect to the next page, you can actually capture the parameters. And if you remember, we did the actual plan name and the plan ID. So we're going to use those in context here. So first we need to actually generate a form tag, which is part of Rails. We've been using simple Rails most of the time, but we can use a generic Rails version here and pass in an ID so we can access it with JavaScript in a minute. Okay, so we need to make sure we end that form. Cool. So in this form is going to be what we use for Stripe elements, and we'll first by getting the markup required for that. So label, class label, and we can do a for card element and enter credit or debit card. Cool. So that's that. Inside that, we need the card element. This is what's gonna basically be the main bread and butter for the JavaScript from Stripe. I'll just put a comment here. Stripe element will be inserted here. I forget how to write comments. That, yeah, okay. And then below that we have another div for the card errors. And these names are important because that's what Stripe's going to look for. You can do a role of alert. And it's just an empty div. And the main thing that's going to make this all work is that we input that parameter of plan ID here. So I'm going to use a hidden field tag and then call it plan ID and then pass in params plan ID. And again, that comes from our pricing page. When you click a subscribe button, that carries over. And then finally, we just need a basic button. Stripe will know that this is going to be a submission handler, so we don't need to actually do anything with it other than style it. And submit. Okay. So with that coded, we need to add our actual route or action on our controller. So we've got the basis here. We're using our layout that we want. And first we're going to do a new. And we actually need to make sure we authenticate. Accept new and create. So basically any other route, which actually we have resources, if you recall, for our routes for subscriptions. Problem is we don't have accompanying views or anything, so it would actually just error out if someone went to that on their own. But we do need new and create. So for new, it's going to be, we're going to check if the user signed in, and current user subscribed. We're going to redirect to root path. So this is just saying if they're already subscribed, they shouldn't see this page. I don't want them to go through the whole step again. It'd be kind of pointless and a headache. Just a kind of self-check, gut check there. Okay, so here is the main portion of the payment. So we're going to access the Stripe gem by calling Stripe and then give it our API key, which we established in the beginning in our credentials. So we can access that by Rails application, credentials, and then Stripe API key. So we need that to do anything. And then we can grab that plan ID, which comes back through in that hidden field form or hidden tag form, and grab it and just call it plan ID. And then from our plan, we're going to give it a variable that's called plan, and we can actually go and retrieve that plan from our Stripe account. So we go Stripe plan dot retrieve and then pass in the plan ID, because we need that ID to associate with the plan. And all that's doing is saying, hey, find say Scholar plan by passing this in. Okay, and then I made a variable for the product. We don't necessarily need it since we're accessing our actual plans, but for grands I'll show you how to do it. Product.retrieve, and then you can just enter in your actual product name here. Mine's just going to be like book library. And in fact, it'll actually be an ID, so you can store that as another key. I'm actually not going to do that, but you could do the same thing just like this if you want to. Really don't end up using it. Okay, so for customer, so we need to establish and create a customer if they're new. If not, they already have a Stripe ID, which is a customer ID. Then we'll just access that and reestablish that bond. And that's useful if they say subscribed once and unsubscribed and then came back later and resubscribed. So you don't have to make a new customer at each time. You still have that information on them. So we're going to check first if the user has a Stripe ID. And then with the gem, we're going to go Stripe customer .retrieve, get the current user ID or Stripe ID. And this is just if they have an account or an ID already. Else, we're going to create a customer. Create, and we just need to pass in an email, which is the current user's .email, and then a source, which is the token that comes through, which I totally forgot to write. So let me go back. We need another variable called token. And that's going to be a params of Stripe token. This comes back when you make that request. And this is pretty much essential to using Stripe. Okay, so with that, we can go ahead and end this block. And that's the customer bit. Finally, once you have a customer established, you need to associate that customer with a subscription. So you can do customer.subscriptions. Create, and then we'll pass in the plan, which is plan.id. And as you can recall, we're getting that plan, passing in our own ID, but you can access the plan object from Stripe and then get the ID off of it. If you're new to this, it's pretty complicated. I understand it, but as you work with it more, it starts to make sense. You're just accessing a bunch of parameters off of big objects. that Stripe gives you back. So this is going to be, I'm actually getting ahead of myself here. Options object or hash. This would be a hash in Ruby. And we're going to basically, this is going to set a bunch of parameters on the user that we want to save. So customer, this is how we get it back down to our app and make things sync up. So we'll take subscription ID. And then I'll also say that the user is going to be subscribed when this creation happens. So these things exist as fields in our tables, in our database. So we're getting the customer ID, and then we're getting the subscription ID, and we're able to save those with no security issues. So say the user comes back, or we want to associate a certain user with a plan, etc., you can do so. And then if the user decides to update their card ever, you can pass in this statement here, which allows you to just kind of extend that options hash. And we'll do something like this. In fact, I'm going to copy this. It's a lot of code that I don't want to type. Right here. So these parameters come through on our form as well. And from that, you can actually grab each instance of a user once it's sent, and you'll see in the JavaScript how we actually make this happen. But this comes through, we can grab those, and if the last 4 digits of the zip code or card are different, then we actually manage this and make a change. So it's just if you were to update your card. So then finally we do current user.update and then pass in options. And you can do redirect to root path. Notice your subscription was set up successfully. Okay. And as I showed in the beginning, we are able to cancel a subscription, and you could do so in this way. We want to set customer equals Stripe customer dot retrieve. So since they're already a customer, we can just retrieve their account by their ID, which is their customer ID, and then customer dot subscriptions dot retrieve current user dot Stripe subscription ID, and then we delete that for sure. That basically gets rid of the subscription, and then we say current user dot update Stripe subscription ID and set it to nil. We just don't want it to be anything. And then you can also do here current user not subscribed equals false. So that's basically saying set the subscription status to false, so they can't use the app in a sense. But that's kind of it doesn't quite work with this app that well, so you almost need to cancel the account, or just maybe code it a bit differently, so where if they're subscribed, they can still have an account but can't access certain features, kind of thing. So it's up to you how you want to do that. Then finally we'll redirect to the root path and pass in a notice saying your subscription has been canceled. I think I spelled that wrong, but don't care. Yeah. Okay, so that's that. And it's quite a hefty controller, I know, but that's basically what's going to stem down and make this all work. So if we were to go to here or reload, I can go ahead and say I want this plan. Looks like I'm getting some sort of error here. Subscriptions. Oh, I think it needs to be subscriptions plural. There we go. So then we got this going on here. We don't have our JavaScript yet, so you don't see the field, but that's going to come up next. So why don't I just go ahead and do that in this video? It might be a longer one, but we'll get it done. Okay, so I'll go ahead and go to subscriptions.coffee and rename that to JS. Clear those comments, save that down. And first we need to kind of override turbo links. So we'll do add event listener. Turbo links load. We're just listening for them so we can do things that doesn't affect turbo links itself. This is set to CoffeeScript, so let me that. Cool. Okay, so within here is where all the magic happens. We need our publishable key, and we can grab that. Since we're going to be injecting it in our layout, we can grab it from the DOM. Give it a variable name. I'm using ES6 for most of this too, so that's something to keep in mind. It should work in modern browsers, but it might not in like older IE11 kind of stuff. So this is that meta tag we generated that we're getting everything from, and we're going to grab it by the name and call it stripe key and pass in the closing brace and then just get the content from it. I think I've done this in a previous video, so quite similar here. Stripe. This is how we give Stripe that API key on the front end. Fix a typo. Okay. And close that. Next we need to establish the elements and create an element. So we'll do elements equals stripe.elements. Pass in an object. And you can pass in all kinds of different ways to customize this thing. I'm going to just pass in some nice ones I found. You can add some different fonts if you want. So this one's going to reference an actual link to some fonts. rsms.me/enter UI.css. Okay, and then we comma separate that, and then we can pass in just the locale to auto. It just kind of just depicts which location you're in as best it can. Then we can do some custom styling. So I'm going to set a style variable to an object. Within that, we're going to have a base and color 32325D. These need to be strings. Font weight and JavaScript CSS. You need to camel case everything, so that's something to remember. Enter UI. This all needs to be in there. So enter UI, open sans, as a fallback, Sego UI, and sans serif. Font size 16 pixels. Also needs to be a string. Font smoothing. Anti-aliased. Comma separate that. come down. You can even a placeholder tag and do a color of that, which is in this case CFD 7DF. And we'll end that one more, call it an invalid block, which is just set to color of E25950. Great, and don't forget your semicolon at the end there. So now we need to create an instance of the card. Elements.create, call it card, and then pass in those styles. And this can be an object. In ES5, this would look different. And then finally, we need to mount the card. And you might need to check like if the card exists first. You might get errors elsewhere in the app. That's something to take into account. I'm not going to worry about it in this case since this is an example app, but definitely do that because you don't want type errors and stuff going on. So we'll do card, add event listener on change. Then we can pass in an object of error as a param. And we'll do an arrow function. And if you want to really reference this, it's all on the Stripe documentation. That's kind of where I'm getting it. It's not necessarily me typing this as fast, knowing exactly what's going on, but it's kind of getting familiar. So here's that card errors div we made. So we check if there's an error. Display error dot text content equals error dot message. Else display error dot text content is empty string. Cool. All right, so next we need to establish where the form is at. So we'll do const form equals document.getElement by ID, payment form, another div ID we made on that create page, or new page I should say. So form.addEventListener submit. So we're just looking for that form to submit. We're going to do async await, which is a new JavaScript thing. It's kind of just like putting something in queue and waiting for something to happen before something else happens. I don't know a lot about it, but it seems pretty neat. We definitely want to prevent the default behavior of the form. So that's what that's doing. And then inside here we can do const, pass in the token and error that come back, and then await stripe.create token. This is part of the Stripe library. Okay. So then we want to again check if there's an error. We'll do const error element equals document.getElement. By ID, and then card errors, error element dot text content equals error dot message, else Stripe token handler token. So anyway, you need a function to do this Stripe token handler part, and that's down here. So let's do that next. Stripe. We'll pass in the token itself, and then another arrow function. So then we can grab our form equals document get element by ID, and then it's payment form again. And then our hidden input, we're going to create one. Create element. Input. Hidden input, not set attribute. Hidden. To do all these things kind of one by one, so it's kind of annoying, but it's a state of the game. Name. Stripe token. So here's where we get that param, if you remember from our controller. This is one of the params that comes back. Attribute value, getting the value of it, so it's token ID. And then on that form, since we accessed it already, we're going to append the child's. It's basically saying throw this at the bottom, the input. And then what doesn't come back from Stripe is we don't need this, is the user data. So we save that stuff. So I'm going to do something fancy here. So then for each, we got an array that we're going to loop through. And you can pass in an element there. And then we'll do add card field and pass in the form, the token, and the field itself. So we need one more function. But first, this is going to call form.submit and finally push that. But outside of this, we need to call our function add card field, and we'll pass in form, token, field, and then we'll do the hidden input thing again. Equals document dot create element, input, hidden input dot set attribute, type hidden, hidden input dot set attribute, name. Here's where it gets fancy. We're going to pass in user card, user with the name of card with an underscore, and then we're going to truncate this stuff, or whatever we want to call it, add it together. There's a name for it, I'm blanking. Just like that. So each field that we loop through here is going to prepend to this, so we are able to access it in our controller. Let me show you. We're right there, all these. You'll see that's how it's going to work. And they'll come through as parameters as well when we make that request. So append child hidden input. Cool. So that's the JavaScript. If all goes right, that should do its trick and make this stuff work. See if the form loads. It does. One last bit is to add some Java or some CSS to make this look like our other stuff. I'm going to do that real quick, and you can access it from the repo if you want to copy the same thing, or just copy and paste like I am. Just adds a little more style to match our own app as opposed to Stripe's styles. You'll see it kind of do its thing here in a second. There we go. So in our URL, we have our plan bookworm and the plan ID, which is coming from Stripe. And I'll pass in test card data Let's see if this works. For grins, I'm gonna pull up the console just to see if any errors happen. Yeah, it looks like it. Hidden input set attribute is not a function. Let's double check our work. Oh, I forgot the value here. Hidden input set attribute. So that's one thing that's wrong. That card and then passing field here. Let's see if I missed anything else. Promise hidden attribute is not a function. Attribute, what line is that on? I misspelled it. 61. Attribute. Did it on all of them. Dang. Alright. Undefined local variable. Did you mean options? Did I? Let's see. So it made it to our controller, so that's a good sign. It should be options. So let's redirect back and try that again. If we get a success message, we're in good shape. Awesome. So that worked. So you see now this shows because I'm subscribed. My account has or will have card data once we enter that portion. But all in all, it's looking good. So great. And you're going to get this error probably if this is trying to access only on, I only want this to really work on the subscription layout. So that's something that you could probably enhance better than I'm doing. Because right now it's trying to look for that meta tag and it's not on this actual page. You can even just add that to your application route as well if you really want to get rid of this error in an easy way. In fact, I might just do that just so it's done. So on our subscribe, I'm just going to grab this tag, put it here. And for grins, I'll probably just load the Stripe library as well. They actually tell you to do that anyway on the docs. And if I could type, we'd be in good shape. Cool. All right, so that went away. So that's one thing. So we don't have any awesome styles yet, so that's still to come. But overall, the charge and everything's working. If I double check billing, one just came through from me. Two of them actually, since I submitted that twice. So we have 2 subscriptions, 3 of them set up. I don't really need these. Probably just cancel. I won't worry about it right now. But yeah, that's working. So the next step is just to kind of clean up the interface and go from there. So I'll see you in the very next one.